Home is everywhere. Home is nowhere. If that resonates, you're in the right place. Welcome to Nomadic Diaries. I'm Doreen, and this is where your story belongs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Nomadic Diaries. We are grateful you're here. And today it is my privilege to introduce you to Joy Wiggins. Now, Joy is currently sitting in Portugal while I'm sitting in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And we've had a conversation in which she's just said, I've always been a consistent mover. So tell us a little bit about that, Joy. Tell us about your moving around the world experience in like, the Cliff Notes.
Yeah, the Cliff Notes version. Don't give the expanded version. Yeah, I think, both my parents were TCK. They were both third culture kids. They were military kids. And so I think it just kind of gets into your blood. And so my mom lived in Spain and England, and my dad lived in Japan and Hawaii and wherever else they were, New York, different places like that. And so it came through to us. And so for me, my dad was in the military, so we moved every 2 or 3 years. And it started with following him to finish up his master's and his doctorate in Indiana. Then we had to go to Virginia and lived in Virginia a couple of times. And then we moved to Germany. And there was one day where, just in the 80s, where all of a sudden my dad said, okay, we're moving to Germany. I was like, what? I was the youngest, so I was just like, what? What are we doing? And they're like, just get on the plane, Joy. So, for me, the German experience opened up everything for me. It was the being able to play kick the can with the kids. We lived on the economy. We didn't live on the base. And so I think a big difference is when you live on the economy and you're in the German village and you are going to the store, the German store, you're learning German, you're actually interacting with people in the German culture, not just the other American kids on the base. And so I think that really opened up an aperture for me about cross-cultural curiosity. And then we were there for 2 years. We were uprooted. We were supposed to stay for another year. And then we went back to Texas, which was a completely different culture shock. So then I think that experience alone opened up so many different avenues of looking at the way people adapt.
Yes.
And the way that they can be curious about where they are, and the way that there are very different regions, even in the US, of where you go and what people are doing and how people adapt and how do you belong. And so as I became an adult, I moved quite a bit. I moved to Arizona. I moved all across the different states. The way that I got back to coming to Europe and traveling abroad was while I was getting my master's, I saw a sign that said teach in China. And I was living in Bellingham, Washington at the time, and I couldn't find a job. For some reason, there were no teaching jobs. So I thought, well, I guess I'm moving to China. And I just got up and went. And I think that was another catalyst for me. So it was Germany and then China. And being in such a different country at a time that it was only open to the US and to other countries for, about 10 years or so. It was in the year 2000. So it was fairly new for people to be traveling and living in China. I thought, gosh, this is so uncomfortable at times. And this was so many times. I was in a small town of 1.5 million. And,
Yes.
it's considered a small town. And being pointed at and being, and just like those really uncomfortable experiences also helped me be curious and opened up a cultural aperture for me. And so then, I wanted those same experiences for my daughter. And I came back, and one of the reasons I got into grad school for my doctorate was I was almost convinced was because of that China experience. That set me apart from other grad students, and that's what got me into the program.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that, when we take those risks and when we have those different cultural experiences and interactions that not everybody has, it does set us apart. And then
it changes us at depth, is what I like to say.
absolutely, yeah.
It's not just superficial, it's at depth.
Mm-hmm. And so I wanted that same experience for my daughter. I thought I wanted her to have that global experience. So I started taking her to Europe, and she's been to Mexico, all around Europe, Morocco, She's 15 now, but we started when she was about 7 or 8. And
Mm.
we went to London, Paris, and kind of and Greece. That really opened up some things for her. And she came back, wanted to share all of that with her friends. And then after that, we just kind of kept going back, saving our money, going back and traveling. And then I finally said to her, I was like, I think we have an opportunity right now to go to Portugal and try to live a life there. It's a risk, but I think we should try it. And she got really excited. And so thank goodness that she's the type of kid that is fairly willing. You have to kind of talk her through it, a little bit,
Sure.
obviously, but she gets excited. And I was like, Ruby, I even had this conversation with her last night. I was like, we have a choice right now, because she was getting nervous about another possible move that we're making. And she was like, I have to start all over again. I have to do all this. I'm like, well, we could think of it two ways. We could think about all the negativity and all the negative things and all the negative things about change. Or, like I've always told you to do since daycare, we can make a choice about this change, because the change is happening. So we can make a choice about it. Either we're going to be negative about it, or we're going to be positive about it, and we're going to
Yeah.
see all the good in it and know that no place is perfect. And so I think that helped, and I think that conversation is a good one to have with her whenever there
And
is another change.
it's ongoing, isn't it? All the
It
time.
is.
I mean,
And I
this
told
is,
her, I was like, this is adulthood.
yeah. So this episode is coming out during the month of what we call, International Women's Day. Your daughter has obviously has this history and this family background of programming of being a third culture kid. I'm just really curious, how long have you been in Portugal with her?
We've been here for a year and a half.
Oh, okay. So
So
you left when
not
she
really
was
that
about
long.
13. You left when she
Yeah.
was 13 years old. So
hmm
tell me, I think a lot of people who are listening might be interested in what the heck does it look like to move with a 13-year-old?
Yeah, it's funny because we moved from Bellingham, Washington, where she lived most of her life. We went during COVID. So that was, already a jarring experience to go from Bellingham, Washington to Austin, Texas.
Yes.
But that's where our family was. And then her dad eventually moved down to Austin as well. We're divorced. And so eventually he moved down as well. But I think she really got to see what that was like to be around family. And then
Yes.
now, but it was hard because when she was 13, she had a little boyfriend. She was in 7th grade. She had some
Mm,
friends. But she also was kind of tired of it a little bit. And I
mm,
think that I was like, I don't think this is where our people are.
mm.
And sometimes I think my sisters and we all kind of go, where are your people? Like, where can you find
Yes.
your people? And I think
Yeah.
a biggest struggle for a TCK is to find your people. Like, who are your people? Who knows? Like,
Absolutely.
they're
Yes.
never
Yeah.
in a location, as we know.
Yeah.
They are in your heart. They're in the connections that you make, and those can change all the time. So I think Ruby has kind of come to realize that as well. And
Hmm.
so we are probably moving to Switzerland next. And so now, again, she has to think through what that would look like to have a whole new set of friends. And so for her, I was like, well, there's different ways we can see that. So it can be
That
positive or
conversation
negative.
matter. Yeah. And do schools enter into this practice, into this picture? How do you evaluate a school when you're the single parent
hmm
and you're faced with a new country, new culture, new language, new friends, new people, new activities? Where do you start to talk to a teenager about that?
Yeah. I think, it's kind of the way I do it. I do it step by step. And so I do what's the next best step. So, first we look for a place to live, and then we really think about the school. And so the couple of parameters around the school is that it has to fit her learning style and her
Hmm.
learning needs. And then
Yes.
we also have to think about, I don't really want her to go to the college in the US. I can't afford for her to. So one of the reasons why we wanted to move to Europe was because I thought we could afford the education here, the university education.
Yes. Yeah.
And her being 15 now, she only really has 3.5 years left.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure that she's in a school that will help her get into a university in Europe
Mm.
over finding
Mm.
one in the US. And before, when we first came here, I put her into a British curriculum at an international school, but that was set here in Portugal. And it didn't really work well because she's neurodivergent. And they didn't, I asked about the accommodations, but I don't think they really understood what that means to make accommodations for
Yeah.
neurodivergence, for kids just with different learning abilities.
Yeah.
And it was the British curriculum can be really strict.
Oh,
And
yes.
so, yeah, so it didn't work well with,
I'm
us.
sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I pulled her out of that one. And then I put her in online school. Then I put her with the American curriculum because there's a lot more flexibility. Well, now, and so part of that was fine, but I don't know that she was learning that much. And so I
Mhm.
could see like it's self-paced, it's online. She was supposed to go to a hub, but then she'd go to the hub here in downtown Lisbon and she'd get distracted and wouldn't do anything and then would come back and work. I'm like, well, that's not going to work. And she
Mm.
needs to have a routine. And so now I was just offered a position at a school because I'm a former teacher um, in an international school, teaching at the high school. So
Terrific.
actually, that would work out well. And it's an
Yes.
IB school, so it's not British curriculum, it's not American curriculum, but it's IB. It's
Yeah.
still going to be a little hard, but
Can you tell for our listeners what IB means and just a couple of sentences about the structure of it now?
yeah, I mean, I'm learning about it too. So it's because in the U.S., it's IB is International Baccalaureate.
Correct.
Basically, what it means is developing global citizens, and everything
Exactly.
is inquiry based. And
Yeah.
so and it's great. I think it's a great way of educating students because you're making interconnections across disciplines, across subjects. So whatever you're learning in history or world geography, you're also going to be learning that in English or in the language that you're learning or science, and they try to connect it. And then they make it project-based learning where the students are creating their own projects.
Yes.
So I think it's a great way to teach. And now, convincing my child of that is a different story because she gets on TikTok and hears all these horrible things about IB. And I'm like, no, listen, you can listen to the TikTok universe who is always negative, is always going to say the worst things, or you can create your own experience and your own ideas about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference with the generations is that I didn't have any of the naysayers. I didn't have information on the internet when I was growing up and moving to these different countries. Now
Exactly.
they
Yeah.
have all that, they're flooded with information and it's like decision fatigue and it's
Yeah.
change fatigue
And
because there's
who do
going to
we
be
listen?
negatives.
Yeah. And who do we listen to? You know,
Yeah.
where are we going to put our attention and where are we going to put our ears and park them to listen to those people? As for your profession, I know you've now lived in Lisbon for a year and a half. You're contemplating another change. You are a single mom. You're an international woman who has been in a family that was generationally global and mobile. Tell me a little bit about cultural agility, because I know that this is something that you focused on both professionally and academically. So, in practice, are all the things that you're just discussing with us and sharing with us and the thinking that you're talking about, does that fall under the heading of cultural agility? And if not, tell us, give us the lowdown on that topic, please.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think cultural agility to me, and I know that there's another woman that writes about it, and I actually didn't discover her until after I started using the term because I thought there's culturally competent and then there's culturally agile. And I grew up in the discipline of culturally competent just means that you're just kind of going along to get along and there's not a lot of like real skill there. And I think cultural agility is the ability to pause and to read a room, to read a situation, to know yourself well enough that you can pause, take a breath, read the room, see what's happening here. How many cultures are being represented? Where are you in the world? Are you in Lisbon, Portugal? Are you in the United States? Are you in, Saudi Arabia? Are you in, Amman, Jordan, which I had done some work there too. And as you pause and you look around, you're like, what am I bringing? What cultural values and my identity am I bringing to the room? So where does that then create a lens that I'm coming from? And then how do I interact that with what's happening in the room, who's in
Mm.
the room, what kind of different cultures. So like, especially here in Lisbon, there's a ton of international cultures. And I'm very mindful of who's in the room, what countries are in the room, and what, baggage they might bring. For me as an American, I bring baggage with me, especially right now. And people have their opinions about me and what, our government is doing. And then there's the histories of the countries that are present in the room. So like I said, in Lisbon, there's a lot of Russians and a lot of Ukrainians. And so there's that interaction there. And just kind of, I'm always curious about what's that like for the people in the room and what do I need to be mindful of? So I maybe shouldn't bring up what our government is doing, or, I have to just be careful, right? Politically
Yes,
conscious.
we have to be more discerning than we've ever been called to be in the past, I would say.
Yes, yes, for
And
sure.
so
And
let
because
me
people
ask,
do want to talk about it.
yeah, and related to that, what are the biggest cultural blind spots that you see Western women? Now, let's just say American, North American, that side of the world. What are the cultural blind spots you see that we bring with us? And how does that affect our leadership in our families and in our professional lives?
Yeah.
And do we
Well,
have blind spots?
oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, the best learning that I've had was I went to Jordan. I'm on Jordan for 2 weeks, and I learned about the women leadership there. And it
Mm.
was a seminar that was an amazing immersive experience. This woman put on, I'm still friends with her today. She just put on the best experience. And every single day that we had different people from rural political leaders that were women. They talked about the Arab Spring. They talked about the political leadership of the women in the rural areas versus the city areas. And then they brought in the Muslim Brotherhood. And then they brought in, I mean, like it was just all kinds of people, historians, artists. We worked with Syrian and we had Iraqi, Syrian, Palestinian, and I think that there was another one, Iraqi. Maybe I already said that one, but refugees, kids that we were working with. And at the time, this was in 2014, we actually, the Palestinian, did not want to meet with us. And she had already scheduled for all that. And so all, just thinking through those types of blind spots that I had coming into this experience and thinking that
Mm.
I thought I knew about what that meant to be having a hijab, or what I thought oppression of women looked like, and how that was completely blown out of the water when I got there, and how I could see the actual impact that these women were making in their communities as leaders, and that they were really impactful. So that these external stereotypes that I thought, that I had about from my own feminist lens, I thought I knew, oh, well, they're oppressed or there's something like that. And now I know to correct other people when I say, when they think that. I'm like, well, actually, in Jordan, this is what I've learned, that they're actually quite impactful, and that there's, we just have to identify our own cultural biases and what we think we know and what our own values are and what we think our values are versus putting that on to somebody else and thinking that we can just attach that to another culture.
In my book, Life in the Camel Lane, I talk about that a little bit because it's all about stories of living in Saudi Arabia. And when I hear some of the things, even nowadays, that people say on the media, I'm like, no, that's not the way it's not the way it is. And it's very different to be on the other side of this and not be companioning it, living with these people day by day. It makes a
Yeah.
big difference.
Well, and I think also just, we sometimes we mistake like being confident for competence,
Yeah.
and so sometimes that confidence might look like recklessness. Or it
Mm,
might, we have to be very mindful of the way people view in that particular culture what we
yeah.
think is a cultural strength, which actually might not be a cultural
Yeah.
strength.
Yeah.
And so, like, looking at how people network together, how they establish power networks, just understanding like how gender solidarity might look in different cultures, and how women are viewed according to their age or their family role or their history. Like, Lisbon is a really interesting place because they had a fascist, for like 50 years,
Yes, they did.
and they lived under
70s,
Salazar.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that that has a big difference on how they communicate with one another, what they're able to say in public, and what they
Mm,
keep private. And I think it's different for like even for Spain. I think it's different because they
mm,
didn't live under a fascist government for as long, and so it's
right.
not as embedded in them, I think, as it is for the Portuguese. And
Yes.
then we have like a wide variety of the colonies that have come in. And so I think
Yeah.
there's just so many, it's just so important to know the history too
Yes.
of where you are and to understand why things might be the way they are.
I would agree with that. I was just having a conversation with a woman yesterday who's a writer on the writing team here, and she was referring to the fact that she'd written an article on the Irish people who actually were fighting on behalf of the US, and then many of them migrated over to the Mexican side, and how many of them were killed on the US side, and just how sad some of these stories are. And she went in depth in that history, and I thought, oh, so much to learn, and only one lifetime to learn even about the history of Mexico.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
we
I mean,
do this? How do we do this?
when I was in China, I read a book that was really good. It was called like the Three Daughters of China. Now this was 26 years ago, so I think that's the correct title. But it was really good because it talked about the generations of three generations of women, and so it talked about in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and like when the Japanese, and then it went into where like foot binding was still a thing,
Mm,
and then it went into the beginning of the communist, times, and then it went into like more present day. At that time, it was like the 80s and 90s, like kind of post Mao times.
sure.
And it was fascinating. It was a fascinating book. And I think it really helped give me an understanding because I got the generational history and I got the story with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think when you can find a good book like that, that gives you that history, and then you can find other pieces of videos or other media that come in and give that life, it's quite interesting.
Well, that's a very good advice and a very good tip. What other cultural agility skills or tips should expat or globally mobile women develop before moving overseas?
Before moving overseas, I would say definitely do your research on the history of the country and what it's like for women on a daily basis. And I
Mm,
think that's really going to be hard to figure that out unless you go to that country and
mm.
tour around for a little bit.
And
Portugal is considered pretty safe. China was considered really safe at the time for women. And because I would walk around, I was about 25 years old at the time in China, and I would walk around, in the middle of the night from the bar, and I was fine. The only person who would ever talk to me is somebody that wanted to practice English.
yes, yes,
That was it.
yes.
And then here in Portugal, it's a little different. Lisbon, I think, is kind of going through some transitions as far as safety is concerned, but
Mhm.
for the most part, it's a pretty safe country. And I think that, as a woman, you've always got to keep that in mind. And I think every woman pretty much knows that.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say is look at how gender is performed in different places, because gender is really a social construct. It's a performance, right? And it's
Yes.
very culturally crafted. I think, for women here in Portugal, what I've been hearing is a lot of really strong women, but that not necessarily that they need the confidence, but they want the permission. They want to get
Mhm.
permission to be able to show their strengths. And I don't think that they're asking for permission, but I think there's like what I've been hearing a lot of is we want we want the doors to be open for us so we can go in and do all the changes and make all the changes that we want. And I think that that's been an insight that I've heard. I just did a mentoring program with women from all over the world. And one of the Russian women at the end of the gala, I was on a panel and she said, Russian women are not even allowed to speak most of the time in these meetings.
Yeah.
And she's like, how do I get my foot in the door? How do I? And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, I don't know. you know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I think that what most women have had to do is we've had to be very strategic about the pathways that we see where we can kind of get our foot in the door
Yeah.
and open it a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And sometimes we want to blow it wide open. But I think it's really important to understand nuance
Sure. Well,
and what
that's
power looks
fascinating.
like.
That's really fascinating. So, how does this human-centered leadership look, for women in a cross-cultural setting? Because are there specific practices that you recommend to Western women who don't have the depth and the breadth of the experience that you have?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the biggest thing, is listening first. And I cannot stress this enough for leaders everywhere or anybody going into a cultural situation. Just don't go in bowl blazing in there. Just go like first listen, observe, and something that my co-author and I wrote for an article about third culture kids is how to read a room and that's what cultural agility is too. It's being able to
Right.
read a room and to know when your voice is needed and when to hold back and when to listen and when to contribute. And I think it's really important for most people, but Americans specifically, is to listen and to watch how people are interacting, who's speaking, when are they speaking, what are they contributing, and to really do that first before feeling like you can go and jump in. So watch who has power and who doesn't, who's speaking, who's like, is it older women that are speaking in the room? And especially if they're women only events versus heterogeneous, groups.
Yes.
Watch that. Watch who is speaking, when they're speaking, what kinds of topics are, acceptable and which ones are not. How much personally are you going to share? How much personal depth? Because sometimes, the friendliness of Americans, I think sometimes can be seen as way too much personal information and they overshare. And it can also sometimes be seen as flirting. And so you have to be careful, right?
Right.
So you have to just be mindful of those things. And then look at who's making the decision. So is it more of a hierarchical, and a lot of intercultural people know this, right? You look at the power distance. Are things hierarchical or are they more individually based and egalitarian? Like we have to look at who's making the decisions and who do we defer to, and having that respect for the culture, not necessarily giving up your own values, but respecting the culture. So as a woman, for me, if I hear a man, speaking ill about another woman, like what I do is I go to that woman and I tell her, like, hey, listen, this
Yes.
was being said about you. I want you to figure out whatever you want to. I'm just giving you the information. Now, sometimes in American culture, we might, stand up for that woman in that meeting against that guy or that man saying something about them, but that might prove to be a backlash later. So we have to be
Absolutely.
very careful
Yeah.
about the impact for the
Yeah.
women that we say that we're in solidarity with. And
Yeah.
so it's also we have to think about our own psychological safety and our own well-being when we stand up for other women. So for me, what I typically do is I go to the woman and say, how can I best support you? You know what you need. What can I do? Because that can be vary on their status in the world, their status in a company, or what they're trying to achieve, when they're going to stand up and when they're going to sit down and when they're going to lean in and lean back. And I think the more strategic women are about their careers and about everything that they're doing, the better they're going to be in solidarity with other women, because we're like, hey, let's strategize together.
Right.
And if we do that together, then we can figure out how to make this change in the organization that we want.
Mhm.
But if we're always individually just trying to get ahead and competing with each other, and that's what my book is about, is how women sabotage. My co-author and I wrote about how women sabotage each other.
Yeah.
and don't even mean to sometimes, but it's just kind of
Right.
the structures that we're in. So I think it's the same thing with when you're going into a different country. You really need to be mindful of what's currently happening in that country and the
Sure.
nuances. And so you
Sure.
have to discern, like you said.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Now you have a new website called Joy Abroad. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so there's my business is so back in the US, I was doing diversity. I was a professor for 20 years teaching culture, equity, and advocacy. And that was helping teachers learn about the laws and policies to protect English language learners and how to be more culturally mindful when in their teaching. So that segued into doing more diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and I got recruited into corporate where I did DEI research and content. And so then as I saw what was happening with the DEI backlash in the US, I started to pivot more towards the work that I'd done around intercultural communication.
Mhm.
And so that then led into helping global teams cross-culturally communicate with each other better, just like what we're talking about now,
Yes.
the
Right.
culturally agile
Right.
change model. And Joy Abroad now became this, I was like, wow, I've been here for a year and a half. I'm watching so many people come here to Lisbon and want to talk to me, pick my brain about things. And so I thought, why not start an arm of my business being
Right.
called Joy Abroad?
Sure.
And it brings in my own personal, third culture kid
Experience. Right.
experiences
Right.
with how do you navigate moving abroad.
Sure.
And so that's what Joy Abroad is. And I've just been offering Airbnb experiences. So I just had one this past Sunday where it was funny because a lot of times, I thought, well, they probably want to know about pastel de natas and like a little bit of history about Lisbon. And a lot of them have been asking me about career advice,
Mhm.
like how to get a TED talk. It's funny because I thought, oh, this is going to be about what it means to be an expat in Lisbon. And it's beyond that. Like it's that and career
Is that
advice.
and how do I live in Lisbon online?
Yeah. Yeah. And this other woman was like, I don't know if I should take this job. She was 25, so she's quite young. And so she was like, what are some words of wisdom for, how to be strategic about my journey? You keep talking about being strategic and that sometimes, especially women my age, I'm in my 50s, we just kind of take what we can get and we're not always
Right.
strategic because we
Yes.
haven't had the ability to be. And I
Sure.
think the more strategic we are, the better that we can
Sure.
actually dictate our lives in the way that we
Sure.
want. And so
So do
Joy
you
Abroad is part of that.
so where would people find you? It's joyabroad.com.
Yeah, well, if you go to my website, just joywiggins.com,
Okay.
that's the best way to find me. And then you'll find Joy Abroad there. And then also LinkedIn is just at Dr. Joy Wiggins. And that I
Oh,
have a newsletter that I talk about EU pay transparency, European policies that protect women in the workplace, and just all kinds of Dr. Joy's Cultural Agility Corner. So I talk about all of these different concepts that we've talked
excellent.
about today.
So this is a great resource for us listeners. So I recommend that you go ahead and follow up on this. Is there any last thought that you would like to give to women who are considering taking this gigantic leap? Perhaps they're feeling influenced by the geopolitical situation in the States. And what is the top of mind topic that you think they should be considering right now?
I think that, like I said, to have strategy, but then also the discomfort and ego are the things that might get in your way. And you cannot let your ego of like what you think you should be doing or what other people think you should be doing or what your career path should look like, those shoulds should be thrown out the window. And I think that you're going to feel discomfort. It's going to be unsettling at times, but you're going to have the next best step. You'll just take the next best step. And your journey has molded you for the greater good that you are right now, right? Like where you are right now in your journey is where you should be. Asha Tyson has a great quote about that. It's one of my favorite quotes. And it's basically everything that you have done in your life is now, and now is right on time. So it's a great way to think through your life, and that you only have this life. It's not a dress rehearsal. You might as well live it, and you might be uncomfortable, but that's okay.
And those are the precious and divine words from Dr. Joy Wiggins to close our episode today. We thank you for this time together, for the wisdom and the experience that you bring to this conversation.
Thank you.
Just in winding up, I just always like to say, sayonara, masalama, and hasta luego.